My name is Sarah Johnson, and 3 weeks ago, I watched my siblings carve up our mother's life like vultures at a feast. They argued over furniture, jewelry, even her old recipe books, while I sat in the corner wondering if anyone remembered that I was the one who held her hand through every sleepless night these past 2 years. What they didn't know was that Mom had been planning something that would change everything. Something that would turn their greed into the most expensive lesson they'd ever receive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the middle child in the Johnson family meant learning early that love came with conditions. My older sister Rebecca blazed through life like a shooting star. Everything she touched seemed to turn golden. Even as kids, she had this way of commanding attention that made adults smile and nod approvingly. She'd flash that perfect smile, toss her hair just right, and suddenly she was everyone's favorite. My younger brother David learned to ride her coattails, becoming her willing accomplice in the art of being memorable. Me, I was the one who cleaned up after their messes, literally and figuratively. When Rebecca broke Mom's favorite vase trying to practice her cheerleading routine in the living room, I was the one who swept up the pieces and helped Mom glue it back together. When David got suspended for cheating on his math test, I was the one who spent my Saturday tutoring him so he could make up the work. I learned that being useful was my currency in this family. Being reliable was my role. Our father, Tom Johnson, worked construction his whole life, and Mom Margaret taught second grade at Riverside Elementary for 37 years. They weren't wealthy people, but they were good people. Dad always said that money couldn't buy character, and Mom believed that every child deserved someone who believed in them. I guess that's why I ended up becoming a nurse. I inherited Mom's need to take care of people, even when they didn't appreciate it. When Dad died 8 years ago from a massive heart attack, everything shifted. Rebecca was already married to Carlos by then, living in her McMansion in Stonewood Estates, posting pictures of her perfect life on social media like it was her full-time job. David was climbing the corporate ladder at his marketing firm, spending his weekends at trendy rooftop bars and networking events. And me? I moved back into my childhood bedroom to take care of Mom. It wasn't a sacrifice I resented, at least not at first. Mom was only 68 when Dad died, still sharp, still teaching, still the woman who could make anyone feel like they mattered. But grief changed her. She became smaller somehow, more fragile. The house that had always been filled with laughter and the smell of her famous chocolate chip cookies became quiet and hollow. I worked my 12-hour shifts at Riverside General, came home to make sure Mom ate dinner, helped her sort through Dad's things when she was ready, listened to her tell the same stories about her students over and over again. Rebecca would visit once a month, usually on Sundays, bringing flowers and staying just long enough to take a few selfies with Mom that she'd post with captions about family being everything. David managed to show up every few months, usually when he needed Mom to do his laundry or when he was between girlfriends and needed a home-cooked meal. Neither of them seemed to notice that Mom was struggling, or maybe they noticed and just assumed I would handle it. I always did handle it. That was my job, right? Sarah the reliable one. Sarah the responsible one. Sarah who would never ask for help because she was too busy giving it. 2 years ago, Mom started forgetting things. Little things at first. She'd misplace her reading glasses, forget which day of the week it was, call me by Rebecca's name. I told myself it was normal aging, stress from losing Dad, maybe just the natural forgetfulness that comes with getting older. But then she got lost driving to the grocery store she'd been shopping at for 20 years. That's when I knew we needed to see a doctor. The diagnosis of early-stage dementia hit like a punch to the gut. The doctor explained it gently, kindly, but the words felt like they were coming from underwater. Progressive, incurable. We'd have good days and bad days, and eventually more bad days than good. Mom took the news with the same grace she'd shown when Dad died, squeezing my hand and saying, "Well, I guess we'll figure it out as we go." Rebecca cried when I told her. Real tears, real grief. She loved Mom, I never doubted that. But love and presence are different things, and presence requires showing up even when it's inconvenient, even when it's scary, even when there are no cameras to capture your devotion. David went through the denial phase, insisting that Mom just needed vitamins or a new hobby or maybe a dating app for seniors. He couldn't accept that the woman who had been our family's emotional center was slowly disappearing. It was easier for him to make jokes about Mom's senior moments than to face the reality that she was sick. I reduced my hours at the hospital, taking on part-time status so I could be home more. My supervisor, Linda Chen, was understanding but concerned. I was one of their best ICU nurses and they needed me at full capacity. But Mom needed me more. I set up pill organizers, created calendar systems, child-proofed the house like Mom was a toddler instead of the woman who had raised 3 children and taught hundreds more. The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff, it was watching her personality fade in and out like a radio signal. Some days she was completely herself, asking about my work, remembering details about my patients, offering advice about my non-existent love life. Other days she'd look at me like I was a stranger, calling me by the name of one of her former students, asking when her mother was coming to pick her up. Rebecca started visiting more often once the diagnosis was official, but her visits felt performative. She'd arrive with expensive gifts that Mom couldn't use, organic groceries that would sit in the refrigerator until I threw them away, and a cheerful energy that felt forced and exhausting. She'd spend an hour taking pictures and videos, updating her social media followers on Mom's condition like it was a lifestyle blog. Spending precious time with my amazing mother, she'd caption a perfectly filtered photo of them holding hands. Family is everything. What she didn't show was me in the background cleaning up the mess from Mom's attempt to make lunch, or the moment right after the photo when Mom asked Rebecca who she was. David's response was to throw money at the problem. He researched expensive memory care facilities, printed out brochures for experimental treatments, suggested we hire a full-time nurse. When I explained that Mom wanted to stay in her own home, that familiar surroundings were important for dementia patients, he'd nod and agree but then bring up the facilities again the next week. Neither of them understood that what Mom needed wasn't expensive solutions. She needed routine. She needed patience. She needed someone who would sit with her when she was confused and scared. Someone who would listen to the same story for the 100th time and respond like it was the first. She needed someone who loved her enough to sacrifice their own convenience for her comfort. The worst part was how invisible my sacrifice became.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
For them, I wasn't giving up my career, my social life, my chance at marriage and children. I was just doing what I'd always done, taking care of things. Sarah being Sarah. Dependable, responsible, forgettable Sarah. Rebecca's real estate career was booming. She'd post about million-dollar listings and luxury open houses, her success measured in designer handbags and European vacations. She'd call Mom every few days, conversations that got shorter as Mom's condition worsened, usually ending with Rebecca frustrated that Mom couldn't remember what they'd talked about the day before. David got promoted to senior account executive, managing social media campaigns for Riverside's hottest restaurants and nightclubs. His Instagram was a constant stream of networking events, craft cocktail tastings, and weekend trips to San Diego or Las Vegas. He'd visit Mom maybe once a month, staying just long enough to feel good about himself as a son, never long enough to see how hard the nights were, how scared Mom got when she couldn't remember where the bathroom was in her own house. I stopped talking to them about the day-to-day reality of Mom's care. What was the point? Rebecca would just suggest I hire help we couldn't afford, and David would make another joke about Mom's forgetfulness that wasn't funny. They saw the Mom they wanted to see during their brief, scheduled visits. I lived with the Mom who existed in the spaces between their attention. The financial strain was real but unspoken. My part-time nursing salary barely covered my student loans and apartment rent, let alone the additional expenses of Mom's care. I moved back into my childhood bedroom permanently, not just to be close to Mom but because I couldn't afford to keep my apartment. I told my siblings it was temporary, for Mom's peace of mind. I didn't tell them I'd been eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for weeks because every extra dollar went to Mom's medications and doctor visits. Mom's teacher's pension covered the basics, but dementia care isn't basic. There were special locks for the doors, motion sensors for the hallways, a medical alert system in case she fell. There were new medications every few months as her condition progressed, each one expensive, most not fully covered by Medicare. There were occupational therapy sessions to help maintain her motor skills, and later speech therapy when she started struggling to find words. Rebecca and David assumed I was managing fine because I never complained. They assumed Mom's needs were simple because they only saw her on her good days, when she'd dress up for their visits and put on her best face. They didn't see the nights when she'd wake up screaming because she didn't recognize her own bedroom. They didn't see her trying to cook breakfast at 2 in the morning, or the time she tried to leave the house in her nightgown to go to work at the school that had already replaced her years ago. I was drowning, but I was drowning quietly, efficiently, without making waves. Because that's what the reliable one does. She handles it, she figures it out, she makes it work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days taking care of other people's families at the hospital, then came home to take care of my own family while my actual siblings lived their lives. My patient families were grateful, appreciative, emotional about the care I provided their loved ones. My own family seemed to assume my care was automatic, expected, nothing special. Linda at the hospital would ask about my personal life, about dating, about my plans for the future. I'd laugh and say I was too busy for romance, too focused on Mom to think about anything else. The truth was, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something for myself. My entire identity had become wrapped up in being the daughter who stayed, the sister who sacrificed, the nurse who never stopped caring. Rebecca's social media was full of motivational quotes about women supporting women, about the importance of following your dreams, about never settling for less than you deserve. I'd scroll through her posts during my breaks at the hospital wondering if she ever saw the irony. Her own sister was settling for less than she deserved every single day, supporting Rebecca's freedom to chase her dreams by holding down the family fort. But I wasn't bitter, not exactly. Mom needed me, and I loved her. Watching her fade was heartbreaking, but I treasured every lucid moment, every smile, every time she remembered my name. There were still flashes of the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with my homework and told me I could be anything I wanted to be. Those moments made everything else bearable. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Mom was more aware than she seemed. That her quiet moments weren't always confusion. Sometimes they were calculation, sometimes she was watching, listening, taking note of who showed up and who didn't. Who sacrificed and who took, who loved her enough to stay and who loved her enough to visit. She was planning something that would finally make my siblings understand what family really means. Something that would show them the difference between performing love and living it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about the day everything changed. The day Mom stopped recognizing any of us permanently. The day the real end began. The morning Mom stopped recognizing me was a Tuesday in March. I'd brought her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and wheat toast cut into triangles, the way she'd made it for me when I was little. She was sitting in her blue robe at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the neighbor's cat sunbathing on the fence. "Good morning, Mom," I said, setting the plate in front of her. She looked up at me with those same green eyes I'd inherited, but they held no warmth, no recognition. Just confusion and a hint of fear. "Excuse me," she said politely, "but I think you have the wrong house. I'm waiting for my daughter Sarah, she should be here soon to take me to school." The words hit like ice water in my veins. I'd prepared for this moment for months, knew it was coming, but nothing could have readied me for the reality of becoming a stranger to the woman who brought me into this world. I sat down across from her, forcing my voice to stay calm and gentle. "I am Sarah, Mom, I'm your daughter. You don't need to go to school anymore, you retired, remember? You taught second grade for 37 years. She studied my face carefully, the way you might examine a map of a foreign country. "No," she said finally, "Sarah is 22. She just started nursing school. You're much older than that. And there it was. In Mom's mind, I was frozen at 22, the age I was when I first started my nursing program. Everything after that, my graduation, my career, the years of caring for her, had been erased. I was a middle-aged stranger claiming to be her young daughter. I called Rebecca first. She was showing a house in Stonewood Estates, her voice crisp and professional when she answered. Sarah, I'm with clients right now. Can this wait? Mom doesn't recognize me anymore, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. She thinks I'm a stranger, she's asking for her daughter Sarah, but she doesn't know that's me. The silence stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally Rebecca's voice came back, smaller now, shaken. What do you mean she doesn't recognize you? You just saw her yesterday. I know, but this morning it's like I'm a complete stranger. She's been talking to me like I'm some woman who wandered into her house. I heard Rebecca excuse herself from her clients, heard a door close. Okay, I'm driving over, don't leave her alone. Sometimes they get agitated when they're confused. I know how to handle her confusion, Rebecca, I've been doing it for 2 years. I didn't mean it like that, I just meant. She trailed off, probably realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. I'll be there in 20 minutes. David was harder to reach. His assistant said he was in a client presentation that couldn't be interrupted. When he finally called back 3 hours later, I'd already lived through Mom asking me 4 more times who I was and why I was in her kitchen. Hey, sorry I missed your call. Jordan said it was about Mom. Is everything okay? She doesn't recognize me, David, at all. She thinks I'm a stranger. What do you mean? Like she's having a bad day? No, not a bad day. This is different. She's completely lucid about everything else. She knows her name, she knows she lives in this house, she remembers Dad. But when she looks at me, she sees a stranger who claims to be her daughter. I heard him typing in the background, probably answering emails while we talked. That's weird, maybe she'll snap out of it. You know how these things go. David, this isn't something she's going to snap out of. This is the progression. The doctor warned us this could happen. Right. Sorry, I'm just swamped today. Rebecca's handling it though, right? She said she was going over there. Rebecca was here for an hour. She left when Mom didn't recognize her either. The typing stopped. Wait, Mom doesn't recognize either of you. No, David, she doesn't recognize any of us anymore. She knows she has children named Sarah, Rebecca and David, but when we're standing in front of her we're just strangers who happen to know things about her life. He was quiet for a long moment. Shit, I'm sorry Sarah, that has to be really hard. Hard didn't begin to cover it. It was devastating in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd prepared for Mom to forget recent events, to lose her ability to form new memories. I'd even prepared for her to forget who I was occasionally. But this complete permanent disconnect was something else entirely. I was grieving the loss of my mother while she sat 3 feet away from me, alive but unreachable. Rebecca came back the next day with a different approach. She brought photo albums, thinking maybe visual reminders would help trigger Mom's memory. She sat beside Mom on the couch, pointing to pictures of us as children. Look, Mom, this is me at my high school graduation, and this is Sarah when she graduated nursing school. And here's David at his first job. Mom looked at the photos with interest, the way you might browse through a stranger's vacation pictures. What lovely children, she said. They look like good kids. Their mother must be very proud. I am their mother, Mom. I'm Rebecca. This is Sarah. We're your daughters. Mom patted Rebecca's hand gently. Oh honey, you're far too young to have children this age. These must be your nieces and nephew. Rebecca tried for 2 hours, showing Mom picture after picture, telling stories about our childhood, explaining relationships and connections. Mom listened politely, occasionally commenting on how nice the photos were but never once showed a flicker of recognition. To her we were pleasant strangers who knew an awful lot about her family. When Rebecca finally gave up, her makeup was smeared from crying. She pulled me aside in the kitchen, her voice barely a whisper. How do you stand it? How do you sit here day after day with her looking at you like she's never seen you before? Because she's still Mom, I said. She's just Mom without the memory of loving us. But she's still kind, still gentle, still the woman who taught us right from wrong. The love is still there, even if she doesn't remember why. But doesn't it kill you? Doesn't it make you want to scream? It did, of course it did. But screaming wouldn't bring her back, and it would only frighten her. I focus on making her comfortable, on making sure she feels safe. That's all I can do. Rebecca left that afternoon and didn't come back for 3 weeks. When she did visit again, she brought Carlos with her, like having her husband there would somehow make the experience less painful. Carlos was patient and kind with Mom, introducing himself as Rebecca's husband, accepting her confusion with grace, but I could see Rebecca struggling watching her mother treat her like a polite stranger. David's visits became even more sporadic. He'd call instead, asking me to put Mom on the phone so he could talk to her. These conversations were surreal, David trying to maintain some semblance of a normal relationship with a woman who thought she was talking to one of Sarah's friends, who happened to know a lot about her son David. "How's David doing?" Mom would ask me after these calls. "He sounds like such a nice young man." Sarah is lucky to have friends who care about her family. The practical challenges multiplied exponentially. Mom would no longer take direction from me about her medications, her meals, her daily routine. In her mind, I was a stranger who had somehow taken over her house, and while she was too polite to throw me out, she wasn't going to let me boss her around either. I had to get creative. I started introducing myself as her home health aide, someone hired by her daughter Sarah to help take care of her. This explanation made sense to Mom, and allowed me to assist her with bathing, dressing, and taking her pills. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of a caring professional rather than a loving daughter. The financial strain reached a breaking point. I'd exhausted my savings and was falling behind on my student loan payments. The part-time nursing work barely covered our basic expenses, and Mom's condition required constant supervision. I couldn't leave her alone for more than a few hours, which meant I couldn't pick up extra shifts or work overtime. I applied for family leave under FMLA, but that was unpaid time off. I looked into respite care services, but they were expensive, and Mom became agitated around new people. The practical reality was that I needed to be there, needed to be her consistent caregiver, but I was slowly going broke doing it. Rebecca and David both offered to help financially, but their offers came with conditions. Rebecca wanted Mom to move to a memory care facility, somewhere with professional staff and specialized programs. "It would be better for her," she insisted, "and better for you. You're burning yourself out." David suggested I hire a live-in aide, someone who could take over the day-to-day care while I went back to work full-time. "You can't sacrifice your entire career for this," he said. Mom wouldn't want that. But they didn't understand that Mom's comfort wasn't just about meeting her physical needs, it was about consistency, familiarity, routine. In her confused world, I was the one stable element. Even if she didn't remember who I was, she knew I was safe. She trusted me to help her navigate her days, to explain why she was in this house, to reassure her when she felt lost. Moving her to a facility would mean starting over with new faces, new routines, new confusion every day. Hiring a stranger to live in her house would disrupt the careful balance we'd established. I was asking for financial help to maintain what was working, not to change everything for their convenience. The conversations about Mom's care became a source of tension between us. Rebecca and David saw my insistence on keeping Mom at home as stubbornness, maybe even selfishness. They thought I was making her care harder than it needed to be, that I was choosing the most difficult path out of some misguided sense of martyrdom. "You don't have to be a hero," Rebecca told me during one particularly heated discussion. "There are professionals who do this for a living, people who are trained for exactly this situation." "I am a professional who does this for a living," I reminded her. "I'm a nurse, I'm trained for exactly this situation. But you're also her daughter, you're too close to this. You can't be objective about what's best for her." The irony was suffocating. For 2 years I'd been the most objective person in the family about Mom's condition. I was the one who'd researched her disease, who'd learned about progression and management. I was the one who'd attended doctor appointments and support group meetings. I was the one who'd educated myself about every aspect of her care, but suddenly because I wanted to keep her comfortable in her own home instead of warehousing her somewhere convenient, I was being too emotional, too subjective. The truth was that Rebecca and David wanted a solution that would allow them to feel good about mom's care, without requiring any real sacrifice from them. A nice facility where professionals would handle the difficult parts, where they could visit on weekends and feel like caring children. Where mom's condition would be someone else's daily reality. I understood their perspective, even sympathized with it. Watching someone you love disappear piece by piece is excruciating. Being powerless to stop it, to fix it, to make it better is one of the hardest things a person can experience. It was easier to create distance, to let professionals handle the heartbreak, to love from afar, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't abandon her to strangers, no matter how qualified those strangers might be. Mom had spent her entire life taking care of other people, her students, her family, her community. She deserved to spend her final years being cared for by someone who loved her, even if she couldn't remember that love. The daily routine became both my salvation and my prison. Mom woke up every morning confused about who I was, but she accepted my explanation that I was her aide. We'd have breakfast together, and I'd tell her about her family, showing her photos and sharing stories. She'd listen with interest, sometimes commenting on how lucky Sarah was to have such devoted siblings. I'd help her shower and dress, making sure she took her medications, planning activities that would keep her engaged without overwhelming her. We'd watch old movies together, work on simple puzzles, look through magazines. She was still mom in so many ways, still kind, still curious about the world, still eager to help others, even when she couldn't help herself. The hardest moments were when flashes of her old self would surface. She'd look at me with sudden clarity, and say something that showed she knew exactly who I was, that she remembered our shared history. But these moments were fleeting, gone before I could fully grasp them, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined the recognition in her eyes. One afternoon, while we were looking through an old recipe box, Mom picked up a card covered in her own handwriting and studied it carefully. "This is my chocolate chip cookie recipe," she said. "I used to make these for my children every Sunday after church. Would you like to make some cookies?" I asked. She looked at me with that familiar spark of determination I remembered from childhood. "Yes, I think I would. My daughter Sarah loves these cookies. She's been working so hard lately, taking care of me. She deserves something special." For 3 hours we baked together like we had when I was little. Mom guided me through the recipe, her muscle memory intact, even when her other memories had faded. She told me stories about teaching me to bake, about the Sunday afternoons we'd spent in the kitchen together, about how proud she was of the woman I'd become. But when the cookies came out of the oven, the moment had passed. She looked at the tray with confusion, then at me with polite interest. "These look delicious," she said. "I'm sure Sarah will appreciate them when she gets home." I boxed up half the cookies and put them in the freezer, saving them for a day when I might need to remember that somewhere in her fading mind, Mom still knew I was her daughter, who worked too hard and deserved something special. These glimpses of recognition became rarer as the months passed. Mom settled into a routine of pleasant confusion, treating me like a helpful stranger who knew an unusual amount about her family. She'd ask me to tell her daughter Sarah that she was proud of her, that she hoped Sarah wasn't working too hard, that she worried about Sarah not having enough time for herself. I'd promise to pass along the messages, then spend my evenings wondering if she somehow knew on some unconscious level that she was talking to Sarah. If her mother's intuition was stronger than her damaged memory, if love could transcend the biological failure of her brain. Rebecca and David's visits became predictable in their brevity. They'd stay just long enough to feel like they'd done their duty, then leave with relief, grateful that I was handling the day-to-day reality they couldn't face. They'd ask how I was holding up, and I'd give them the same answer every time: "I'm managing," because that's what I did. I managed. I adapted. I found ways to make it work, even when it felt impossible. I became an expert at being a stranger to my own mother, at loving someone who couldn't love me back, at caring for someone who saw me as a paid employee rather than her devoted daughter. What I didn't know was that Mom was still fighting, still present in ways I couldn't see, that her confusion was sometimes more selective than it appeared, that she was making plans, even as her memory failed her, plans that would change everything I thought I knew about our family. But I wouldn't learn about those plans until after the funeral, when her final gift would reveal the depth of her awareness and the power of a mother's love to transcend even the cruelest disease. Mom's final decline happened faster than anyone expected. The doctors had warned us that dementia progression could be unpredictable, but after months of relative stability, we'd settled into what felt like a sustainable routine. Then, in the span of 3 weeks, everything unraveled. It started with her refusing to eat, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she'd forgotten how to use utensils. I'd sit beside her at every meal, gently guiding her hands, showing her how to hold a fork, how to bring food to her mouth. Sometimes she'd remember for a few bites, then drift away again, staring at the silverware like it was some fascinating but incomprehensible artifact. The speech went next. Words became elusive, slipping away just as she reached for them. She'd start a sentence with perfect clarity, then stop mid-thought, her face clouding with frustration as the words simply vanished. I learned to fill in the gaps, to finish her thoughts based on context and facial expressions, becoming fluent in the language of incomplete sentences and meaningful silence. Walking became uncertain, then dangerous. Mom had always been steady on her feet, even as her mind failed her, but suddenly she was shuffling, reaching for walls and furniture for support, her balance betraying her when she least expected it. I moved a twin bed into the living room so she wouldn't have to navigate the stairs to her bedroom. Everything she needed had to be on the first floor now. Rebecca came by one afternoon and found me sitting on the floor beside Mom's bed, holding her hand while she dozed. Mom had been agitated all morning, confused about where she was, asking repeatedly for her mother who had died 20 years earlier. The only thing that calmed her was human contact, the reassurance of someone staying close. "Sarah, you look terrible," Rebecca said, and she wasn't wrong. I'd lost 15 pounds in the past month, surviving on coffee and whatever was left on Mom's plate. My hair was pulled back in the same ponytail I'd been wearing for weeks, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd put on real clothes instead of scrubs or pajamas. "She's scared when she's alone," I explained. "Even for a few minutes. She doesn't understand where she is or why she's here." Rebecca sat down in Dad's old recliner, studying Mom's sleeping face. "How long can you keep this up? You're going to make yourself sick." I wanted to snap at her, to ask where she'd been for the past month when I'd been handling Mom's rapid decline alone, but I was too tired to fight. "I'm managing." "No, you're not. Look at yourself. When was the last time you ate a real meal? When did you last sleep for more than 2 hours at a time?" She was right, but admitting it felt like giving up. What choice do I have? She needs me. She needs professional care, Sarah. This is beyond what any one person can handle. Before I could respond, Mom stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked around the room with the confused terror that had become her default expression, then focused on Rebecca. "Are you here to help me find my mother?" Mom asked, her voice small and lost. "I can't find her anywhere and I'm supposed to be home for dinner." Rebecca's composure cracked. She knelt beside the bed, taking Mom's other hand. "Mom, it's me. It's Rebecca. You don't need to find your mother. You're safe here, Rebecca." Mom studied her face carefully. "Rebecca is just a little girl. She has pigtails and missing teeth. You're much too old to be Rebecca." "I grew up, Mom. I'm 31 now. You're thinking of me when I was little." Mom shook her head with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a confused child. "That's impossible. Rebecca was just playing in the backyard yesterday. She can't be 31. Rebecca tried for another 10 minutes, showing Mom pictures on her phone, talking about shared memories, trying to anchor Mom in the present. But Mom's reality was decades in the past, and no amount of evidence could convince her otherwise. She was living in a time when her children were small, when her husband was alive, when her own mother was still someone she could call for comfort. After Rebecca left that day, I found myself wondering if this was what dying looked like when it happened slowly. Not the dramatic sudden goodbye we'd experienced with Dad, but this gradual erasure, this piece-by-piece disappearance of the person we'd known. Mom's body was still here, still needed care and comfort, but the woman who had raised us was already gone. David visited the following weekend, bringing takeout from Mom's favorite restaurant. She couldn't eat the food anymore, too confused by the textures and flavors, but she smiled when he told her it was from Giuseppe's, the Italian place where our family had celebrated every birthday and graduation. "Giuseppe makes the best meatballs," she said, her face lighting up with a memory that somehow survived when so many others had vanished. "We should take the children there for David's birthday. He's turning 16 next week." David was 29, but in Mom's mind, he was still the teenager she'd thrown a surprise party for in this very living room. She spent the visit planning his birthday celebration, asking David to help her remember who to invite, what kind of cake he wanted, whether he'd prefer bowling or miniature golf for the party activity. David played along, his voice gentle and patient in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. "Whatever you think is best, Mom. You always plan the perfect parties. I want it to be special," she said. "David works so hard in school, he deserves something wonderful." After she fell asleep, David and I sat in the kitchen, the weight of what we'd witnessed settling between us like a third presence. "She seems happy," he said finally. "When she's talking about us as kids, she seems really happy." "She is happy," I agreed. "She's living in the best parts of her memory. Before Dad died, before she got sick, when we were all still home and life was simpler. Maybe that's not the worst way to go," David said, "living in your happiest memories instead of your scariest reality." It was the most insightful thing I'd heard him say about Mom's condition, and for a moment I saw glimpses of the thoughtful boy he'd been before life taught him to prioritize image over substance. But then he started talking about a new client campaign he was working on, and the moment passed. The end came on a rainy Thursday in October. I'd been awake with Mom most of the night because she was convinced that burglars were trying to break into the house. Every sound, the heater cycling on, the old house settling, rain against the windows, sent her into panic. I'd spent hours reassuring her that we were safe, that the doors were locked, that I was there to protect her. Around dawn, she finally settled into peaceful sleep. I dozed beside her bed, exhausted and grateful for the quiet. When I woke up 3 hours later, she was still sleeping, but something was different. Her breathing was shallow and labored, her skin pale and cool to the touch. I called 911, then Rebecca, then David, my nursing training taking over even as my heart broke. The paramedics arrived first, working efficiently to stabilize her vitals, preparing her for transport to the hospital. Rebecca burst through the front door as they were loading Mom into the ambulance, her face streaked with tears and panic. "Is she going to be okay?" Rebecca asked, grabbing my arm as we followed the stretcher outside. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Her body is just worn out. She's been fighting this disease for so long." David met us at the hospital, still in his work clothes, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen him since childhood. We sat in the waiting room for hours, while doctors ran tests and tried to determine what could be done. The diagnosis was what I'd expected: pneumonia, complicated by her advanced dementia and overall decline. Her body was shutting down. The next 4 days passed in a blur of medical consultations, difficult decisions, and precious final moments. Mom drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing us, sometimes lost in her own private world. When she was awake, she was peaceful, no longer frightened or confused, as if the proximity of death had granted her some temporary clarity. On Sunday evening, With all three of us holding her hands, Mom opened her eyes one last time. She looked at each of us with perfect recognition, her gaze clear and focused in a way it hadn't been for months. "My beautiful children," she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably present. "I love you so much. Take care of each other." Those were her last words. She died quietly 20 minutes later, surrounded by the family she'd spent her life nurturing, finally free from the disease that had stolen so much of her final years. The funeral planning became an immediate source of tension. Rebecca, always the organizer, took charge of the arrangements with military efficiency. She booked the nicest funeral home in town, ordered elaborate flower arrangements, and insisted on a catered reception afterward. "Mom deserves the best," she said when David questioned the expense. "Who's paying for all this?" I asked during one of our planning meetings at the funeral home. "We'll split it 3 ways," Rebecca said without hesitation. "It's what Mom would want." I did the math in my head. My share of Rebecca's elaborate plans would cost more than I made in 2 months. I'd already exhausted my savings during Mom's final months, and my credit cards were maxed out from medical expenses not covered by Medicare. "I can't afford a third of this," I said quietly. "Could we maybe do something simpler?" Rebecca's expression tightened. "This is our mother's funeral, Sarah, not the time to be cheap." "I'm not being cheap. I'm being realistic. I've been supporting Mom financially for 2 years while working part-time. I literally don't have the money for this." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I could cover Sarah's portion," he offered. "It's not a big deal." "That's not the point," Rebecca snapped. "The point is that we all contribute equally to honoring our mother." "I honored our mother by sacrificing my career to take care of her," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "While you two were building your lives, I was emptying my savings account for her medication and doctor visits." The funeral director cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we could look at some other package options. We have several tiers of service that might work better for your budget." Rebecca's face flushed red. "Fine. We'll do whatever Sarah can afford. God forbid we give Mom a funeral worthy of the amazing woman she was." The guilt hit like a physical blow. Here I was, arguing about money at my mother's funeral planning, probably confirming every negative thing Rebecca had ever thought about my priorities. But I couldn't pay for something I couldn't afford, and I was tired of apologizing for financial limitations that existed because I'd chosen to care for Mom instead of myself. We settled on a more modest service, which was still beautiful and fitting for the woman Mom had been. The funeral home was full of people whose lives she'd touched, former students, now adults with children of their own, colleagues from her teaching years, neighbors who remembered her kindness. It was exactly the send-off she deserved, regardless of how much it cost. Rebecca spoke at the service, delivering a polished eulogy about Mom's dedication to education and family. David shared funny stories about Mom's attempts to keep up with technology and her insistence on feeding anyone who walked through her door. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about Mom's final years, about her grace in the face of a terrible disease, about the love that persisted even when memory failed. "She taught us that love isn't something you remember," I said, looking out at the sea of faces. "It's something you do, every day, in small ways and big ones, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That's the lesson she lived, and that's the legacy she leaves us. After the service, people approached me with stories I'd never heard, expressing gratitude for care I'd provided that they'd somehow learned about. Former students told me how proud Mom had been of my nursing career, how she'd bragged about my compassion and skill. Neighbors mentioned seeing me come and go at all hours, always patient and gentle with Mom even during her most difficult days. It was strange, hearing about my own life from other people's perspective. I'd been so focused on the day-to-day reality of caregiving that I hadn't realized how visible my devotion had been to others, how many people had witnessed the sacrifice I thought I was making in private. The reception was held at Rebecca's house, her spacious living room easily accommodating the 50 or so people who came to share memories and comfort. I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, helping serve food and refill drinks, more comfortable in a supporting role than being the center of attention. That's when I noticed Carlos, Rebecca's husband, on the phone in the corner, his voice urgent and businesslike. "No, I understand the timeline is tight, but this changes things. We need to postpone the closing until after the estate is settled." Estate. The word sent a chill through me. In all the chaos of Mom's final days and funeral planning, none of us had talked about practical matters like wills or inheritance. I'd assumed there wasn't much to discuss. Mom and Dad had lived modestly, and whatever assets existed would need to cover outstanding medical bills and funeral expenses. But Carlos's conversation suggested there might be more to consider than I'd realized. Property transfers, legal proceedings, assets that needed to be valued and distributed. The house alone was worth something, though I had no idea how much. Mom and Dad had bought it in 1987 for $42,000, but real estate in Riverside had increased significantly over the years. After the last guest left, Rebecca, David, and I found ourselves alone in her kitchen, the silence heavy with exhaustion and unspoken grief. We'd been functioning on adrenaline and necessity for days, managing logistics and emotions in equal measure. Now, with nothing left to organize or arrange, the reality of Mom's absence settled over us like a weight. "We need to talk about Mom's affairs," Rebecca said, pouring herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. "Carlos spoke to a probate attorney today. There are some things we need to handle." "What kind of things?" David asked, loosening his tie for the first time all day. "Legal stuff. The house, her bank accounts, insurance policies. Everything has to go through probate court unless she had a will, which I don't think she did." I thought about the stack of papers in Mom's bedroom closet, documents she'd kept in an old shoebox along with our birth certificates and Dad's death certificate. She might have had a will. She was always very organized about important papers. "We should go through the house this weekend," Rebecca said. "Start sorting through her things, looking for legal documents. The lawyer said we need to file paperwork within 30 days. The idea of going through Mom's belongings, of deciding what to keep and what to discard, felt overwhelming. Her entire life was contained in that house. Photos, furniture, clothes, books, kitchen gadgets, craft supplies from decades of hobbies. How do you condense 74 years of living into piles of keep, donate, and trash? "I can handle the house," I offered. "I know where everything is, and I have time." "We should all do it together," David said. "It doesn't seem right for you to go through everything alone. Besides," Rebecca added, "we need to make decisions about valuable items. Things should be divided fairly between the three of us." I wasn't sure what valuable items she was referring to. Mom's engagement ring, maybe, though it was modest by today's standards. Some antique furniture that had belonged to her mother. Dad's tools, which might be worth something to the right buyer. Most of what filled the house was exactly what it appeared to be: the accumulated possessions of two people who'd worked middle-class jobs and raised 3 children without much money left over for luxury. We agreed to meet at the house the following Saturday, giving ourselves a week to process the funeral and gather the emotional strength needed for the task ahead. I spent that week in a strange limbo, staying in my childhood bedroom without Mom to care for, sleeping through the night for the first time in months, but waking up disoriented by the silence. The house felt different without her presence, larger somehow, but also emptier, as if her absence had created a vacuum that sucked the warmth out of familiar spaces. I found myself listening for her voice, waiting for the sound of her shuffling slippers in the hallway or her calling my name from the kitchen. On Wednesday, I drove to the hospital for the first time since taking extended leave to care for Mom. Linda Chen, my supervisor, welcomed me back with genuine warmth and concern. "How are you holding up?" she asked, studying my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen grief in all its forms. "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "It's strange, having my time be my own again. I keep waiting for someone to need something from me. That's normal. You've been a full-time caregiver for 2 years. It's going to take time to remember who you were before that became your entire identity. We talked about my return to work, about gradually increasing my hours as I readjusted to hospital life. The ICU had missed my expertise, and there were several positions available that would allow me to rebuild my career and financial stability. It felt good to be needed in a professional capacity again, to use skills that had nothing to do with managing confusion and decline. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the somber task ahead of us. Rebecca arrived promptly at 9, armed with boxes, tape, and printed labels for categorizing items. David showed up 20 minutes later with coffee and donuts, his contribution to what he clearly expected to be a long, difficult day. We started in Mom's bedroom, the most personal and therefore most challenging space. Her clothes still hung in the closet, still smelled faintly of her perfume and fabric softener. Rebecca moved through the garments efficiently, separating items by condition and potential value. These can be donated, she said, indicating a pile of everyday clothes. But we should keep the good jewelry and anything with sentimental value. David found the shoebox of important papers in the closet, just where I'd expected. Birth certificates, marriage license, Dad's death certificate, insurance policies, and tucked beneath everything else, a manila envelope marked last will and testament in Mom's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, not sure what to expect. The document was professionally prepared, dated just 6 months before Mom's death, signed and notarized in the presence of witnesses. As I read through the legal language, my siblings looked over my shoulder, their breathing the only sound in the room. The will was simple and straightforward. After specific bequests of personal items, Mom's wedding ring to Rebecca, Dad's watch to David, her recipe collection to me, everything else was to be divided equally among the 3 children. The house, her savings, life insurance proceeds, everything split 3 ways just as we'd always assumed it would be. Well, that's settled then, Rebecca said, sounding almost disappointed that there were no surprises. We can take this to the probate attorney and get the process started. But I kept reading, and at the bottom of the will, there was something else. Handwritten note, added after the original document was signed, referencing an additional video message that contained final instructions for my children. There's a video, I said, pointing to the notation. She made some kind of recording with additional instructions. We searched the house for an hour, looking for a DVD, a flash drive, anything that might contain Mom's final message. It was David who found it, tucked inside her jewelry box beneath a layer of tissue paper, a small digital recorder, the kind court reporters use, with a sticky note attached, for my children to hear together. We gathered in the living room, the 3 of us sitting on the couch, where we'd watched countless family movies over the years. David connected the recorder to the television, and after a few minutes of technical fumbling, Mom's voice filled the room. She was sitting in the chair beside her bed, the one where I'd spent so many hours reading to her during her final months. But this recording was from earlier, when her mind was still mostly clear, when she could still articulate complex thoughts and plan for the future. My dear children, her voice began, and the sound of it, strong, lucid, unmistakably our mother, brought fresh tears to all of our eyes. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you're probably going through my things, trying to figure out what comes next. I wanted to leave you with some final thoughts, some things I couldn't say in a legal document. She talked about each of us individually, sharing memories and expressing pride in the adults we'd become. She thanked Rebecca for her success and ambition, for showing that women could build empires and break barriers. She thanked David for his creativity and humor, for bringing lightness to heavy moments and joy to ordinary days. Then she turned to me, and her voice changed, becoming softer and infinitely tender. Sarah, my precious girl, I don't know how to thank you for what you've given me these past 2 years. I know you think I don't remember, that my disease has stolen my awareness of your sacrifice. But even when I couldn't say your name, even when I looked at you like a stranger, my heart knew who you were. My soul recognized the daughter who stayed when staying was hard, who chose my comfort over her own dreams, who loved me enough to let me die at home surrounded by familiarity. The room fell silent except for our quiet crying. On the screen, Mom continued talking, her words deliberate and clear. I've watched Rebecca and David build beautiful lives, and I'm proud of them. But I've also watched Sarah put her life on hold to care for mine. I've seen her work nights at the hospital, then come home to care for a mother who didn't even recognize her sacrifice. I've seen her choose my needs over her own financial security, over her career advancement, over any chance at love or marriage or children of her own. Rebecca and David were staring at the screen, transfixed by this version of Mom they hadn't seen in months. This woman who was fully present and heartbreakingly aware, which is why, Mom continued, I've made some changes to my will that aren't reflected in the legal document you found, changes that better reflect the reality of how my children have lived their lives, and who has truly earned the right to inherit what your father and I built together. The recording continued, and with each word, the foundation of everything we thought we knew about Mom's final wishes crumbled beneath us, revealing a truth none of us had seen coming. Mom's image on the screen shifted slightly as she reached for something off camera, then returned with a thick manila folder in her hands. Her movements were deliberate, her expression serious in a way that made my stomach clench with anticipation. 6 months ago, when I was still lucid enough to make legal decisions, I went to see Henry Walsh without any of you knowing. I told him I needed to make some adjustments to my estate planning, adjustments that reflected the reality of my family's situation rather than the fiction of equal contribution. Rebecca's face had gone pale beside me. David was gripping the arm of the couch so tightly his knuckles were white. I felt suspended in time, waiting for whatever revelation was coming. The will you found is real, but it's not complete. It was my insurance policy, in case I lost my nerve or changed my mind, but I didn't change my mind. If anything, watching how my final months played out only confirmed that I made the right choice. Mom opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be another legal document. This is a codicil to my will, properly executed and witnessed, that supersedes the equal distribution outlined in the original document. Henry has the official copy in his office, but I wanted you to hear my reasoning directly from me before you involve lawyers and courts. She looked directly into the camera, and for a moment it felt like she was looking right at us, right through us. Rebecca, David, I love you both dearly. You've given me grandchildren I adore, careers I can brag about, lives that make me proud to be your mother, but love and fairness aren't always the same thing. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel Rebecca's tension radiating from the couch beside me. Sarah has sacrificed 2 years of her life, 2 years of career advancement, 2 years of potential relationships and personal growth, to care for me as my mind failed. She has emptied her savings account, maxed out her credit cards, and put her own future on hold to ensure I could die with dignity in my own home. Mom's voice grew stronger, more determined. She has bathed me when I couldn't remember how to bathe myself. She has fed me when I forgot how to eat. She has held my hand through countless nights when I was terrified and confused. Always patient, always gentle, even when I treated her like a stranger. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I couldn't look away from the screen, couldn't process what I was hearing. She has done this while Rebecca and David built their careers and their bank accounts, while they visited occasionally and offered advice from a distance. They love me, yes, but Sarah has lived that love every single day, even when it cost her everything. Mom lifted the legal document. Therefore I am leaving the house at 847 Maple Street along with all its contents, solely to Sarah Johnson. The life insurance policy, my savings accounts, my investment portfolio, and my pension survivor benefits will also go entirely to Sarah. Rebecca and David will receive the personal items specified in the original will, but no financial inheritance. The words hit like physical blows. I heard Rebecca gasp, heard David make a strangled sound of disbelief, but Mom wasn't finished. I know this seems unfair to Rebecca and David, and perhaps by some measures it is. But fairness isn't about equal distribution when contributions have been wildly unequal. Fairness is about acknowledging sacrifice, rewarding loyalty, and ensuring that the child who gave up her own security for mine doesn't face financial ruin as a result of her generosity. She set the document aside and folded her hands in her lap. Sarah, my darling girl, this house has been in our family for 36 years. Your father and I raised you children here, and you've cared for both of us here. It should remain yours. The money I'm leaving you isn't enough to make up for what you've sacrificed, but it's enough to rebuild the life you put on hold for me. I was sobbing now, ugly, uncontrolled tears that shook my entire body. The magnitude of what Mom was saying, what she was giving me, was overwhelming. I'd never expected anything beyond an equal third of whatever modest estate she left behind. To Rebecca and David, I want you to understand that this decision isn't punishment, it's recognition. You've both built successful lives and comfortable financial situations. You don't need an inheritance to secure your futures. Sarah does. She needs this foundation to rebuild what she gave up for love. Mom leaned forward slightly, her expression intense. I hope you can find it in your hearts to support this decision, to celebrate Sarah's inheritance rather than resent it. She has earned every penny through devotion that went far beyond what any parent has the right to expect from a child. The recording continued for another few minutes, with Mom expressing her love for each of us one more time, sharing hopes for our futures, and asking us to stay close as a family despite what she knew might be a difficult revelation. When her image finally faded to black, the three of us sat in stunned silence. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "She can't do this. You can't just change a will like that. There are laws about mental competency, about undue influence. She was competent when she made this decision." I said, my voice hoarse from crying. The recording is dated 6 months ago, before her major decline, and there was no undue influence. I didn't even know she was considering this. David ran his hands through his hair, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been admiration. "Jesus, Sarah, did you have any idea?" "None," I said honestly. "I thought we'd split everything 3 ways, just like the original will said. I never asked for this, never expected it. But you're not going to turn it down," Rebecca said, and there was an edge to her voice that hadn't been there moments before. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. The idea of inheriting everything felt enormous, overwhelming, almost too much to process. "I need time to think about what this means, what it means," Rebecca said, standing up abruptly, "is that you manipulated a sick old woman into giving you everything. What it means is that you played the martyr for 2 years, making the rest of us look like selfish monsters, so you could cash in when she died." The accusation hit like a slap. "That's not what happened, and you know it." "Do I? Because this is awfully convenient, isn't it? Poor Sarah. Sacrificing everything for Mom, while her successful siblings ignore their dying mother. What a perfect narrative to justify taking everything for yourself." David stood up too, moving between Rebecca and me. "That's enough, Becca. You heard what Mom said. Sarah didn't influence this decision. Sarah didn't have to influence it directly." Rebecca shot back. "She just had to make sure she was the only one providing care, the only one making sacrifices, the only one looking like the devoted daughter." "I never stopped you from helping," I said, my voice rising. "I begged you both to be more involved. You're the ones who chose convenience over commitment." "Convenience?" Rebecca's face was flushed with anger. "I have a career, Sarah. I have a husband and responsibilities. I couldn't just drop everything to play nursemaid like you did." "I have a career too," I said. "I gave it up because someone had to take care of her, and you two made it clear it wasn't going to be you." The argument escalated quickly, 2 years of resentment and guilt erupting into accusations and recriminations. Rebecca accused me of emotional manipulation and calculated martyrdom. I accused her of abandoning our mother when she needed us most. David tried to mediate, but his attempts only made both of us angrier. "You want to know what I think?" Rebecca said finally, her voice cold and controlled. "I think you saw an opportunity 2 years ago. I think you realized Mom was vulnerable, and that caring for her might pay off in the end. I think this whole devoted daughter act was a long-term investment strategy. The words were so cruel, so far from the truth of what I'd experienced, that I couldn't even respond. I just stared at her, this woman who shared my DNA but apparently understood nothing about who I was or why I'd made the choices I'd made. "Get out," I said quietly. "What? Get out of my house," I said louder this time. "Both of you. Get out. This isn't your house yet," Rebecca snapped. "And when I contest this will, it never will be." David grabbed Rebecca's arm. "Come on, Becca, let's go. We all need time to process this." They left without another word, Rebecca's heels clicking angrily across the hardwood floor, David casting apologetic glances over his shoulder as he followed her out. I sat alone in the living room where I'd spent countless hours caring for Mom, surrounded by the possessions she'd left me, wondering if accepting her gift would cost me my siblings forever. Over the following days, I found myself alone in the house with my thoughts and Mom's belongings, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The lawyer Henry Walsh confirmed that Mom's codicil was legally binding and properly executed. She'd been evaluated by a physician before signing it, establishing her mental competency beyond any reasonable doubt. "Your mother was very thorough," Henry explained during our meeting in his office. "She anticipated that there might be challenges to this decision, so she documented everything carefully. Medical evaluations, witness statements, even a detailed written explanation of her reasoning that matches what she said in the video." He handed me a thick folder containing financial documents I'd never seen before. Mom's savings account contained almost $200,000, money she'd accumulated through decades of careful budgeting and wise investing. Her life insurance policy was worth another $200,000. The house, according to the most recent appraisal, was valued at $850,000. "Your mother was more financially secure than most people realized," Henry said. "She and your father lived modestly, but they saved aggressively. The total value of the estate is approximately $1.3 million. The number was staggering. I'd grown up thinking we were a working-class family living paycheck to paycheck, but apparently Mom and Dad had been quietly building wealth for decades. Wealth that was now mine, according to legal documents I still couldn't quite believe were real." Rebecca called that evening, her voice stiff and formal. "I've hired an attorney. We're going to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence." "Rebecca, please don't do this." Mom was clear about her reasoning. She wanted to take care of the daughter who took care of her. She was sick, Sarah. Sick people make poor decisions, especially when they're being manipulated by someone they trust. I never manipulated her. I never even discussed inheritance with her. You heard the recording. She made this decision independently. My lawyer says there are grounds for challenge. Mental illness, isolation from family members, potential coercion from the primary caregiver. We'll see what a judge thinks about your devoted daughter routine. The call ended abruptly, leaving me holding a silent phone and wondering how caring for our mother had become evidence of my guilt, rather than proof of my love. David called an hour later, his tone more conciliatory but equally painful. "I don't think you manipulated Mom," he said. "But I also don't think she fully understood what she was doing. Leaving everything to one child, cutting out the other two completely, that's not the Mom I knew. Maybe you didn't know her as well as you thought," I said. "Maybe the Mom you knew was someone who kept her opinions to herself to avoid conflict. Maybe, or maybe the disease affected her judgment more than any of us realized. She was evaluated by a doctor, David. She was competent when she made this decision. Competent enough to sign legal documents, maybe. But was she competent enough to understand the impact on our family? Was she thinking clearly about how this would affect our relationships with each other?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself since watching the video. Had Mom fully considered the consequences of her decision? Had she anticipated that it might destroy whatever remained of our sibling relationships? "I think she knew exactly what she was doing," I said finally. "I think she'd watched us for 2 years and seen who we really were, who we'd always been, and she made her decision based on that reality." The legal battle that followed was exactly as ugly as I'd expected. Rebecca's attorney painted me as a calculating manipulator who'd isolated our mother from her other children in order to secure maximum inheritance. They presented evidence of my financial struggles, suggesting I'd been motivated by desperation rather than love. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the vulnerability of dementia patients to suggestion and coercion. They questioned the timing of Mom's decision, arguing that her disease progression made her unable to understand the full implications of cutting two children out of her will entirely. My attorney countered with medical records showing Mom's competency at the time she made the changes, with witness statements from her doctor and lawyer confirming her lucidity during the legal process. We presented evidence of my siblings' minimal involvement in Mom's care, contrasting it with my own documented sacrifices. The proceedings were covered by the local newspaper, a family inheritance dispute that captured public attention because of the dramatic disparity in the final distribution. I found myself portrayed alternately as a devoted daughter who deserved recognition for her sacrifice, or as a manipulative opportunist who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. The judge took 6 weeks to reach his decision, 6 weeks during which Rebecca and David refused to speak to me, and I lived alone in the house that might or might not become legally mine. I spent those weeks going through Mom's belongings, reading through decades of journals and letters, trying to understand the woman who'd made such a momentous decision. What I found in her papers was evidence of a mind far sharper than any of us had realized. Detailed financial records going back years, careful documentation of each of our visits and contributions to her care, even copies of emails between Rebecca and David discussing their concerns about my obsession with being Mom's primary caregiver. She'd been watching, listening, evaluating. Her decision hadn't been made in a moment of dementia-induced confusion. It had been the result of careful observation and deliberate consideration, the final act of a woman who understood her children better than they understood themselves. The judge ruled in favor of upholding Mom's final wishes. His written decision noted that while the inheritance distribution was unusual, there was no evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. Mom had the legal right to distribute her assets as she saw fit, and her reasoning, while emotionally difficult for some family members, was rational and clearly expressed. The court finds that Margaret Johnson made a conscious choice to reward the child who sacrificed her own financial security and career advancement to provide care during the dissident's final years, the judge wrote. While this choice may seem unfair to the other beneficiaries, fairness is not always synonymous with equality. Rebecca's attorney immediately filed an appeal, prolonging the legal battle and the family rift. But 3 months later the appeals court upheld the original decision, ruling that Mom's mental competency and clear articulation of her reasoning left no grounds for overturning her final wishes. I officially inherited everything on a cold December morning, 9 months after Mom's death. Henry Walsh handed me the keys to the house I'd been living in all along with account information for savings and investment accounts that would ensure my financial security for the rest of my life. Your mother would be proud, he said as I signed the final papers. She knew this decision would be difficult, but she believed it was right. That evening I sat in Mom's old recliner, looking around the living room where so much of our family's history had played out. I thought about Rebecca and David, who hadn't spoken to me since the legal battle began. I thought about holidays that would now be spent alone, about grandchildren I might never get to know, about relationships that might never heal. But I also thought about Mom's voice on that recording, about her clear-eyed assessment of who had sacrificed and who had chosen comfort. I thought about the financial security that would allow me to rebuild my career on my own terms, to pursue the life I'd put on hold for love. The inheritance wasn't just money and property. It was validation of choices that had seemed invisible to everyone but the person who mattered most. It was proof that sacrificial love doesn't go unnoticed, even when it appears thankless. 6 months later I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo of David's son at his kindergarten graduation, smiling gap-toothed in his tiny cap and gown. On the back, David had written, "Thought you'd want to see this." Mom would have been so proud. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall of silence. A possibility that love might eventually prove stronger than money, that family might survive even the most difficult truths. I kept the photo on Mom's old dresser, next to the recipe box she'd left me and the small framed picture of all of us from Christmas 5 years ago, when we were still a family that gathered around the same table. Someday maybe we'd find our way back to each other. Someday the inheritance would matter less than the love that had always connected us, even when it was buried under years of resentment and misunderstanding. But even if that day never came, I knew I'd made the right choice in accepting Mom's final gift. She'd seen me when I felt invisible, valued my sacrifice when it seemed thankless, and ensured that my devotion would be rewarded rather than taken for granted. In her own way, she'd given me more than money. She'd given me the knowledge that love, real love, never goes unnoticed by the people who matter most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that love comes back to you in ways you never expected, from beyond the grave, in the form of a mother's final blessing on the child who stayed when staying was hard. The house is mine now, filled with memories and possibilities in equal measure. I've returned to nursing full-time, using Mom's gift to rebuild the career I'd interrupted for love. I volunteer at the dementia care facility, where other families navigate the same difficult journey we traveled, offering support to daughters and sons who wonder if their sacrifices matter. They do matter. They always matter. And sometimes, if you're blessed with a mother like mine, that sacrifice is recognized and rewarded in ways that extend far beyond money or property. Mom's final video message sits in my jewelry box now, next to the watch she left David and the ring she left Rebecca. Someday, when the wounds have healed and we've learned to separate love from legal battles, maybe we'll watch it together again. Maybe we'll remember that we're more than an inheritance dispute, that we're children who shared the same mother and the same house and the same love, even when we expressed it differently. Until then, I'll keep the faith that Mom's wisdom extended beyond her will, that her love for all of us was strong enough to survive even the most difficult decisions. She taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worthwhile. And in her final act, she proved that a mother's love can transcend death itself, reaching across the divide between worlds to ensure her children are cared for, even when they can no longer care for themselves. The first year after the legal battle ended was the loneliest of my life, and that's saying something considering I'd spent 2 years watching my mother forget who I was. At least during those caregiving years, I had purpose. I had someone who needed me even if she didn't recognize me. Now I had a house full of memories, financial security I'd never dreamed of, and absolutely no one to share it with. Rebecca blocked my number after the appeals court decision. David's occasional text messages stopped entirely after I replied to his kindergarten graduation photo with thanks and an invitation to visit. The silence from both of them was absolute and deliberate, a wall built brick by brick from resentment and wounded pride. I threw myself into work at Riverside General with an intensity that worried Linda Chen. She'd pull me aside during shifts to ask if I was okay, if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of myself the way I'd taken care of everyone else. I'd assure her I was fine, then go home to the empty house and realize I was lying. The inheritance sat in my bank account like a weight rather than a gift. Every time I checked the balance, I thought about the cost of that money, the relationships it had destroyed, the family gatherings that would never happen again. Mom had wanted to reward my sacrifice, but sometimes it felt like I'd traded one kind of loss for another. I started attending a grief support group at the community center, thinking it might help to talk about losing Mom with people who understood. What I discovered was that I wasn't just grieving my mother. I was grieving my siblings, my sense of family, the future I'd imagined where we'd all grow old together and share holidays and watch each other's children grow up. There was a woman in the group named Patricia, whose adult children had stopped speaking to her after her husband's death, fighting over his life insurance money. She understood the unique pain of losing family to inheritance disputes, in a way most people couldn't. Money changes people, she said one evening after our session, over coffee at the diner next door. Or maybe it just reveals who they've always been. Either way, the loss is the same. Do you regret it? I asked. Do you wish you'd just divided everything equally to keep the peace? She thought about it for a long moment. No, because that would have meant dishonoring my husband's final wishes to avoid conflict with people who should have honored them anyway. Your mother made her choice for a reason. Undermining that choice wouldn't bring your siblings back. It would just mean you'd sacrificed twice for nothing. Her words stayed with me during the long quiet months that followed. I used some of the inheritance to pay off my student loans, a debt that had hung over me for a decade like a constant low-grade anxiety. The relief of that freedom was profound, like being able to breathe fully for the first time in years. I enrolled in a nurse practitioner program at the university, something I'd always wanted to do but could never afford. The coursework was challenging and consuming, giving structure to my days and purpose beyond the hospital shifts. For the first time in years, I was investing in my own future rather than putting it on hold for someone else's needs. The house slowly transformed from a museum of Mom's life into something that felt like mine. I kept most of her furniture because it was comfortable and familiar, but I repainted the walls in colors that made me happy. I turned Dad's old workshop into a study where I could do my coursework. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd never had time for during the caregiving years. My colleagues at the hospital started inviting me to social events, movie nights and dinners out, activities I'd declined so often during Mom's illness that people had stopped asking. I said yes more often now, slowly rebuilding a social life that existed outside of duty and obligation. One evening, about 18 months after Mom's death, I was having dinner with Linda and some other nurses from the ICU when the conversation turned to family. Everyone was sharing stories about difficult relatives and holiday drama, the usual complaints that come with large family gatherings. What about you, Sarah? Someone asked. Any family drama we should know about? I hesitated, unsure how to explain my situation without making it sound like I was asking for sympathy. But Linda already knew most of the story, and something in her expression encouraged me to be honest. My mother left me her entire estate when she died. I said simply. My siblings contested it. We haven't spoken since. The table went quiet for a moment. Then one of the younger nurses, Jennifer, said, "Wait, she left you everything, like completely cut them out. She left them personal items, but the house and money came to me. I'd been her primary caregiver for 2 years while she had dementia, so she was rewarding you for taking care of her." Jennifer said, "That seems fair." My siblings didn't see it that way. They thought I'd manipulated her or that she wasn't mentally competent when she made the decision. Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "But the court sided with you. The court sided with Mom's right to distribute her assets as she chose. Whether that was fair or not wasn't really the question." The conversation moved on to other topics, but later as Linda and I walked to our cars, she brought it up again. "Do you regret accepting the inheritance?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, lying awake at night in my childhood bedroom, wondering if keeping Mom's gift was worth losing my siblings. Some days, yes, I admit it. Some days I think about what it would have been like to split everything 3 ways, to keep the peace, to still have a family. But then I remember that Mom made this choice deliberately with full understanding of what it meant. Rejecting her gift would have been rejecting her final act of love and recognition. "Your siblings could still come around," Linda said gently. "Grief does strange things to people. Sometimes it takes years to work through." I wanted to believe her, but it had been 18 months of complete silence. No birthday cards, no holiday messages, no acknowledgement of my existence beyond the legal documents their attorneys had filed. Whatever bridge had once connected us had been thoroughly burned. The second anniversary of Mom's death approached like a storm on the horizon. I'd been dreading it, knowing I'd spend the day alone with my memories and grief, with no siblings to share the burden of missing her. I took the day off work, and drove to the cemetery early in the morning, before the summer heat made standing in the sun unbearable. Mom's grave was in the section with Dad's, their matching headstones side by side like they'd slept for 43 years of marriage. I'd brought fresh flowers, the sunflowers she'd always loved, and a folding chair because I planned to stay a while. I was sitting there talking to Mom the way I'd gotten into the habit of doing, telling her about my nurse practitioner program and the garden I'd planted, when I heard footsteps on the path behind me. I turned, expecting to see a groundskeeper or another visitor heading to a different grave. It was David. He looked older than I remembered, his hair showing more gray at the temples, his face thinner and more lined. He stopped about 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain and uncomfortable. "Hi, Sarah." "David." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I didn't know you'd be here. I wasn't planning on it. Then I woke up this morning and realized what day it was, and I couldn't stay away." He gestured toward the grave. "Mind if I join you?" I moved my chair to the side, making space for him to stand beside me. We were quiet for a long moment, both looking at Mom's headstone with its simple inscription, "Margaret Ann Johnson, beloved wife, mother and teacher." "I miss her," David said finally. "Every day I think about calling her, and then I remember she's gone." "Me too. I should have been here more," he continued. "During those last 2 years, I should have visited more, helped more, been more present. You shouldn't have had to handle everything alone." The apology hung in the air between us. I wanted to accept it gracefully, to tell him it was okay, that I understood, but I also needed him to understand what those 2 years had cost me. "It was really hard, David. Not just the caregiving but feeling invisible while I did it. Feeling like my sacrifice didn't matter to anyone but Mom. It mattered. I just didn't know how to help, how to be useful. You were so good at taking care of her, so competent and capable. I felt like I'd just be in the way. I needed you to be in the way sometimes. I needed someone to spell me so I could sleep through the night, or grocery shop without worrying, or just sit with her so I wasn't always the only one." He nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "You're right, I failed you. And I failed Mom. And then when the will reading happened, I let Rebecca convince me that you'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing. It was easier to believe you'd manipulated Mom than to admit I'd neglected her. I never wanted everything," I said. "I never even thought about inheritance while I was taking care of her. I just wanted her to be comfortable and safe. I know that now. It took me a long time to see past my own guilt and hurt, but I know you're not the villain Rebecca made you out to be." "How is Rebecca?" The question came out before I could stop it, before I could pretend I didn't care. "Angry, mostly. At you, at Mom, at the whole situation. She's convinced herself that accepting Mom's decision is the same as admitting she was a bad daughter. She wasn't a bad daughter. She just wasn't the primary caregiver. Those aren't the same thing." David finally looked at me directly, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected. "Hope. Would you be willing to talk to her? To try to work through this as a family?" I thought about it, about the last 18 months of silence and hurt, about the legal battle and the accusations, about the possibility of reconciliation balanced against the risk of more pain. "I don't know if she wants to talk to me," I said honestly, "and I'm not going to apologize for accepting Mom's gift, but if she's willing to have a real conversation, not just another argument about who deserved what, then yes, I'm willing to try." David pulled out his phone. "Can I give her your number? She blocked your old one, but if you're open to talking, I can let her know." I gave him my number, though I wasn't sure anything would come of it. Rebecca's anger had always been more stubborn than David's.
Guilt. But having my brother standing beside me at Mom's grave, having any family present on this difficult anniversary, felt like a small miracle. "I'm sorry," David said again as he prepared to leave, "for all of it, for not being there when Mom needed me, for turning against you when she made her choice, for wasting 18 months being angry instead of trying to understand." "I'm sorry too," I said, "for not fighting harder to keep our family together, for accepting a situation that I knew would hurt you both, even if it was what Mom wanted." We hugged awkwardly at first, then with real warmth. He smelled like the cologne he'd worn since college, familiar and comforting. When he pulled away, he was smiling through his tears. "Mom would be glad we're talking again," he said. "She'd be furious it took us this long." He laughed, and the sound was so unexpected and welcome that I laughed too.
For a moment, we were just two siblings missing their mother, sharing the burden of grief instead of carrying it alone. David left after promising to be in touch, and I stayed at the cemetery for another hour, talking to Mom about what had just happened, about the possibility of reconciliation and the long road ahead. The conversation with David had cracked something open in my chest, a hope I'd been afraid to acknowledge. 3 days later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. Sarah? Rebecca's voice was tentative, uncertain in a way I'd never heard from her before. Rebecca? Hi, David said. You might be willing to talk. I wasn't sure if that was true, or if he was just being optimistic. It's true. I'm willing to talk if you are. Silence stretched between us, filled with 2 years of hurt and misunderstanding. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. I've been horrible to you, worse than horrible. I've spent 2 years blaming you for my own guilt and inadequacy as a daughter. Rebecca, no, let me finish. Please, I've practiced this so many times in my head, and if I don't say it now, I might lose my nerve. I waited, holding my breath. I was jealous of you, Rebecca said. The whole time Mom was sick, I was jealous of your relationship with her, of how you were the one she needed, the one who got to be with her every day. I hated myself for not being able to do what you did, and I hated you for making it look so easy. It wasn't easy, I said softly. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know that now. At the time I told myself you were just naturally better at caregiving, that you didn't have the responsibilities I had, that it wasn't as big a sacrifice for you because you didn't have as much to give up. I minimized what you were doing, because acknowledging the truth would have meant admitting I was choosing my comfort over Mom's needs. She paused and I could hear her crying. When the will was read, when Mom made it clear that she valued your sacrifice over our success, it shattered every story I'd told myself about being a good daughter. So instead of accepting that truth, I attacked you. I made you the villain because I couldn't face being the one who'd failed. You didn't fail, Rebecca. You visited, you called, you cared. Just because you weren't the primary caregiver doesn't mean you didn't love her. But it does mean I didn't earn what you earned. Mom's inheritance wasn't about love, it was about recognizing sacrifice, and you sacrificed everything while I sacrificed nothing. The words hung between us, painful but true. I'd wanted Rebecca to understand this for so long, but now that she was saying it, all I felt was sadness for both of us. I don't want Mom's last gift to be what destroys our family, I said. She wouldn't have wanted that. I don't know if I can get past it, Rebecca admitted. Not the inheritance itself, but what it represents. Every time I think about you having everything, I'm reminded of my own failures as a daughter. Then don't think about me having everything. Think about Mom making a choice that reflected her values and her gratitude. Think about honoring that choice instead of resenting it. I'm trying, that's why I'm calling. David said you were at the cemetery on the anniversary, and that you two talked. I wanted you to know that I'm working on this, on accepting what happened and finding a way forward. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, which felt like a start. We talked for 20 more minutes, carefully navigating around the sharpest edges of our hurt, slowly rebuilding the possibility of relationship. Over the following months, the three of us began meeting occasionally for coffee or lunch, neutral territory where we could practice being siblings again, without the weight of Mom's house and inheritance pressing down on every interaction. The conversations were sometimes awkward, often emotional, but gradually they became easier. Rebecca started therapy to work through her feelings about Mom's death and the inheritance dispute. She talked openly about her struggles with perfectionism and her need for external validation, about how Mom's final choice had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. David became a bridge between Rebecca and me, checking in with both of us, facilitating conversations, reminding us that we were family even when family felt fragile and fraught.
He brought his son to visit one Saturday afternoon, and watching my nephew play in the backyard, where we'd all grown up, felt like healing. One evening, about 3 years after Mom's death, the three of us gathered at the house on Maple Street for dinner. It was Rebecca's idea, a gesture that felt monumental given everything that had happened. She brought wine, and Carlos, who'd remained quietly supportive throughout all our family drama. David brought his son and his new girlfriend, a kindergarten teacher, who reminded me of Mom in her gentle warmth. We cooked Mom's famous lasagna recipe, the one that required 3 hours of preparation, and filled the house with smells of garlic and tomato sauce and cheese. We set the table in the dining room we'd eaten at thousands of times, using Mom's good china that I'd carefully preserved. Before we ate, Rebecca raised her glass. "I want to propose a toast to Mom, who loved us enough to make the hard choices, to Sarah, who loved Mom enough to sacrifice everything, and to second chances, which apparently take longer than any of us would like, but are worth the wait." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt like we were a family again, not the same family we'd been before Mom got sick, before the inheritance dispute, before everything fell apart, but a family nonetheless, scarred and wiser and more honest about our limitations and our love. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Rebecca pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out her phone. She opened her photos and scrolled to a picture of Mom's video while recording, the one that had torn us apart. "I've been watching this," she said, really listening to what Mom was saying, not just hearing the parts about the inheritance. She talked about loving all of us, about being proud of all of us. The distribution of assets wasn't about loving you more, it was about recognizing different kinds of contribution. "I've tried to tell you that," I said gently. "I know, but I had to hear it from her, in her own words, without the filter of my own hurt and resentment. And I realized that holding on to my anger wasn't hurting you, it was hurting me, it was keeping me from honoring Mom's memory and her wishes." She looked around the kitchen, where we'd spent so many childhood moments. "This house should be yours. These memories should be yours. You earned them in ways David and I never did, and I'm finally okay with that." We hugged then, really hugged, for the first time since before the funeral. It felt like forgiveness, or maybe understanding, or maybe just the acceptance that love is complicated, and families are messy, and sometimes the fairest choice is the one that hurts. That night, after everyone left and I was alone again in the house that was truly mine now in every sense, I sat in Mom's recliner and thought about the journey from her death to this moment of reconciliation. 3 years of pain and growth, of loss and recovery, of learning that inheritance wasn't just about money and property. Mom had left me financial security, yes, but she'd also left me the harder gift of knowing my worth, of understanding that sacrifice deserves recognition, that love expressed through action matters more than love expressed through words. She'd forced our family to confront uncomfortable truths about who we were and what we valued. In the end, the inheritance dispute had destroyed us temporarily, only to rebuild us more authentically. We'd lost the casual, superficial harmony we'd maintained before her illness, but we'd gained something more valuable: honesty about our flaws, acknowledgement of our different contributions, acceptance that fairness sometimes means unequal distribution. I finished my nurse practitioner program and opened a small practice focused on geriatric care, using part of the inheritance to fund a sliding scale payment system for families who couldn't afford traditional care. It felt like honoring Mom's legacy, taking what she'd given me and using it to help others navigate the same difficult journey we'd traveled. Rebecca and I would never have the easy, uncomplicated relationship some siblings enjoy. But we had something perhaps more valuable, a relationship built on truth rather than pretense, on acceptance rather than expectation. We showed up for each other's important moments, celebrated each other's victories, and forgave each other's failures. David remained our bridge, the peacekeeper and connector, the one who remembered birthdays and organized family gatherings and made sure we stayed in each other's lives, even when it would have been easier to drift apart. On the 5th anniversary of Mom's death, we all returned to the cemetery together. We brought sunflowers and stories, sharing memories of the woman who'd shaped us all in different ways. Standing between my brother and sister at our mother's grave, I finally understood what Mom had been trying to teach us. Love isn't about equal distribution, it's about recognition, acknowledgement, gratitude for the different ways people show up in our lives. Some people love through words and visits, and cheerful presence. Some people love through sacrifice and service, and steadfast devotion. All forms of love matter, but not all forms of love earn the same reward. Mom had spent her life teaching children that effort deserves recognition, that hard work should be acknowledged, that dedication matters. In her final act, she'd taught her own children the same lesson. The inheritance wasn't a rejection of Rebecca and David's love, it was an affirmation of mine. And finally, standing at her grave, with my siblings beside me, with our complicated history, and our hard-won reconciliation, I could accept that gift without guilt, without apology, without wishing things had been different. Mom's love had been big enough to encompass all of us. Her final gift had been brave enough to tell the truth. And our love for each other, bruised and tested and rebuilt, was strong enough to survive that truth. That was the real inheritance, worth more than any house or bank account. The knowledge that family, real family, can break and heal, can hurt and forgive, can fall apart and find its way back together, not because it's easy, but because love, the kind that persists through loss and conflict and painful truth, is always worth fighting for. 7 years after Mom's death, I stood in the backyard of the house on Maple Street, watching Rebecca's daughter chase fireflies in the twilight. Emily was 6 years old. With Rebecca's determination and Mom's gentle spirit, a combination that made my heart ache with recognition and joy. "Aunt Sarah, look! I caught one." Emily ran toward me with cupped hands, her face glowing with excitement. "Let's see," I said, kneeling down to peer through the gaps in her fingers at the blinking light trapped inside. "Can I keep it?" "Fireflies are happier when they're free," I said gently. "Just like people, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let things go." She considered this with the seriousness only children can muster, then opened her hands. We watched the firefly climb onto her palm, rest for a moment, then lift off into the darkening sky, its light blinking a farewell. "There will be more tomorrow," I assured her as she watched it disappear. "I know," she said. "Mommy says you always find what you need if you're patient." The wisdom of that statement, coming from Rebecca through her daughter, felt like grace. My sister had learned patience the hard way, through years of therapy and uncomfortable self-examination. She'd transformed her need for control into acceptance, her perfectionism into understanding that some things can't be forced or rushed. Inside the house, David was showing his son, now 11, how to make Mom's chocolate chip cookies. Through the kitchen window, I could see them measuring ingredients, could hear David's patient instructions mixed with his son's laughter. My nephew had inherited David's humor and Mom's warmth, a boy who hugged easily and shared freely, and reminded me daily why rebuilding our family had been worth every difficult conversation. Carlos was setting up the projector in the living room, preparing for what had become our annual tradition. Every year on the anniversary of Mom's death, we gathered at the house to watch her video message together, to remember not just the inheritance dispute it had caused, but the woman behind the words, the mother who had loved us enough to tell difficult truths. The first few times we'd watched it as a reunited family had been painful, everyone carefully monitoring their reactions, afraid of saying something that might reopen old wounds. But time and intention had softened those sharp edges. Now we could watch Mom's face on the screen and focus on her love, rather than the legal battle her words had sparked. "Sarah, Can you grab the photo albums from the hall closet? Rebecca called from the living room. Emily wants to see pictures of Grandma. I found the albums exactly where Mom had always kept them, organized by year, and meticulously labeled. Flipping through them while walking back to the living room, I paused on a picture from Christmas 1998. Rebecca, David and I were sitting under the tree in matching pajamas. Mom had sewn herself, our faces bright with childhood joy, and the certainty that our family would always be this uncomplicated. If I could go back and tell those children what was coming, Dad's death, Mom's illness, the inheritance dispute, the years of estrangement, would they believe me? Would they handle things differently, prepare better, hold tighter to each other before everything fell apart? Probably not. Some lessons can only be learned through living them. Found them, I said, handing the albums to Emily, who immediately began paging through with the focused intensity of a scholar. That's Mommy, she exclaimed, pointing to a picture of Rebecca at her high school graduation. That's right. And that's me. And that's Uncle David. You all look so young. We were young once, Rebecca said, sitting beside her daughter. Hard as that is to believe now, we spent the next hour looking through photos and telling stories, filling Emily and David's son with narratives about their grandmother, making sure Mom's memory stayed alive not just in legal documents and inheritance, but in the oral history of our family. Emily was particularly fascinated by the pictures of Mom in her classroom, surrounded by students who looked up at her with obvious adoration. Grandma was a teacher like Miss Wilson. Exactly like Miss Wilson, I confirmed. She taught second grade for a very long time. Did she love it? She loved it more than almost anything, Rebecca said, except maybe her own children. The simplicity of that statement, coming from Rebecca, showed how far she'd traveled from the angry defensive woman who'd accused me of manipulation 7 years ago. She could acknowledge now that Mom had loved us all, that her final distribution of assets had been about something other than love, something more complex and harder to accept. When the last photo had been examined, and the last story told, we gathered in the living room for the video. Carlos dimmed the lights, while David queued up the recording. Emily snuggled against Rebecca on the couch, while David's son sat on the floor with a bowl of popcorn, treating this like the sacred family ritual it had become. Mom's face appeared on the screen, and as always, the sight of her alive and lucid brought a collective catch of breath from all of us. Emily had never met her grandmother, had only known her through stories and pictures, and watching her reaction to seeing Mom move and speak for the first time was profound. That's Grandma, she whispered. That's Grandma, Rebecca confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. We'd all memorized the words by now, could recite them like a prayer or a poem, but hearing them fresh through Emily's first viewing reminded me why we kept watching, why this ritual mattered. When Mom explained her reasoning for leaving everything to me, Emily turned to look at her mother with confusion. Why did Grandma do that? Rebecca pulled her daughter closer. Because Aunt Sarah took care of Grandma when she was very sick, and Grandma wanted to make sure Aunt Sarah would be okay. But what about you and Uncle David? We were okay already. We had good jobs and nice houses. Aunt Sarah had given up a lot to help Grandma, and Grandma wanted to thank her. The explanation was so much simpler than the reality had been, distilled down to essentials that a 6-year-old could understand. But in its simplicity, it captured the truth we'd all finally accepted. After the video ended, we sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each of us processing our own memories and emotions. Then David's son, with the bluntness of children, asked, "Did you guys have a big fight about it?" David laughed, a sound without bitterness. "Yeah, buddy, we did. A really big fight that lasted a long time, but you made up. Eventually, because family is more important than money, even when it takes a while to remember that." Emily, not to be outdone by her cousin's serious questions, asked Aunt Sarah, "Are you rich now?" The adults laughed, and I considered how to answer honestly without making wealth seem like the point of the story. I'm comfortable. Grandma made sure I wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. Are you going to give some to Mommy and Uncle David? Rebecca started to shush her daughter, but I held up a hand. It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. Your mom and uncle don't need my money. They've built their own success, but sometimes I help in other ways. When you and your cousin need things, when our family wants to take trips together, when someone needs support, that's when I share what Grandma gave me. It was true. Over the years, I'd paid for family vacations that brought us together, covered my nephew's summer camp when David was between jobs, contributed to Emily's private school tuition when Rebecca's real estate business had a slow year. I'd never announced these contributions, never used them as leverage or proof of generosity. They were simply what family did with resources when family needed help. Rebecca reached over and squeezed my hand. Aunt Sarah is very generous, she told Emily, just like Grandma was. After the children were in bed, Emily in my guest room, David's son on an air mattress in the study, the three of us sat on the back porch with wine and the comfortable silence of people who'd been through war together and survived. I've been thinking, Rebecca said, breaking the quiet, about selling my business. Both David and I turned to look at her in surprise. Rebecca's real estate career had been her identity for so long, the measure of her success and worth. Why? David asked. Because I've spent 20 years chasing the next sale, the bigger commission, the more impressive listing. And for what? So I can post about it on social media, so I can prove to everyone that I'm successful. She swirled her wine, watching the liquid catch the porch light. Emily asked me last week if I loved selling houses more than I loved her. She asked because I'd missed her school play for a showing. It was the third thing I'd missed that month. Kids say things they don't mean when they're upset, I offered, but she wasn't wrong to ask. I've been so busy building an empire to prove my worth that I've been neglecting the people who should matter most. I've become exactly what I accused you of not being, Sarah. Absent when presence matters. The parallel wasn't lost on any of us. Rebecca had spent years resenting me for being Mom's primary caregiver, for earning recognition through sacrifice. Now she was recognizing that presence, not performance, was what created real connection. What would you do instead? David asked. I don't know yet. Maybe teaching like Mom did. Maybe something with children or families. Something that lets me be present for Emily, that gives me time for what actually matters. We sat with that revelation, understanding that it represented years of growth and self-examination. The Rebecca who'd fought against Mom's will 7 years ago would never have questioned her career or admitted that professional success wasn't enough. I've been thinking too, David said, about selling the loft and moving closer to here. My son spends half his time with his mom in the suburbs, and when he's with me we're in this urban bachelor pad that doesn't feel like a home. I want him to have what we had, a backyard, a neighborhood, a sense of stability. You're welcome to move into the neighborhood, I said. There's a house 2 blocks over that just went on the market. I've been watching it, David admitted, wondering if it would be weird to live that close to you after everything. It would be wonderful, I said honestly. Emily could walk over, your son could ride his bike here, we could be the family we used to be, just evolved. Rebecca laughed softly. Look at us. 7 years ago we weren't speaking, and now we're planning to recreate our childhood neighborhood. Mom would love it. David said. Mom would say it took us long enough to figure out what matters. I corrected. We talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming futures. 3 siblings who'd been broken apart by grief and money and pride, now choosing each other with intention rather than obligation. The inheritance that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately taught us what Mom had known all along, that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars or property, but in the relationships we nurture and the presence we maintain. The next morning,
Before Rebecca and David packed up their families to leave, we stood together in Mom's garden, now overgrown and wild in a way she never would have permitted. I'd let it go natural, preferring the chaos of unplanned growth to the rigid structure Mom had maintained. "We should fix this up," Rebecca said, surveying the weeds and wildflowers with a critical eye. "Why?" I asked. "I like it this way, because it was important to Mom. Mom's gone," I said gently, "and this is my garden now. I get to decide how it grows." Rebecca looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. I keep forgetting that this is your house, your space. I still sometimes think of it as Mom and Dad's place." It was Mom and Dad's place, I acknowledged. Now it's mine, but it's also still ours. In the ways that matter, this will always be where we gather, where we remember, where we come home to. David picked up Emily, who'd been collecting dandelions from the wild garden. "I think the mess is perfect," he said. "It's like Mom's memory, not perfect or pristine, but real and alive, and still growing." We said our goodbyes with promises to gather again soon, not waiting for anniversaries or obligations, but simply because we wanted to, because we'd learned that family requires maintenance and intention, that relationships don't survive on autopilot. After they left, I walked through the house that was wholly mine, touching familiar surfaces, and remembering Mom's recliner, where she'd sat through countless evenings, the kitchen table where we'd done homework and shared meals and solved problems, the walls that held our history, imperfect and complicated and beautiful. I thought about the 7-year journey from that devastating reading of Mom's will to this moment of hard-won peace, the anger and accusations, the legal battles and estrangement, the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust and understanding. None of it had been easy, all of it had been necessary. Mom's final gift hadn't been the money or the house. It had been the catalyst for truth-telling, the forcing mechanism that made us confront who we really were versus who we pretended to be. She'd known that easy forgiveness without real understanding would leave us forever stuck in patterns of resentment and misunderstanding. By making the hard choice, by distributing her assets based on contribution rather than equality, she'd forced us into conflict that ultimately led to honesty, and from that honesty came genuine reconciliation, not the superficial peace we'd maintained before her illness, but deep acceptance of each other's flaws and strengths. I'd paid a price for that inheritance beyond the months of legal battles and years of estrangement. I'd carried the burden of being the chosen one, of having my sacrifice publicly recognized in a way that humiliated my siblings. I'd questioned whether accepting Mom's gift was selfish or honorable, whether keeping the inheritance served her memory or betrayed family unity. But standing in my house on a Sunday morning, remembering my sister's hand squeeze and my brother's plans to move closer, watching fireflies blink in the garden, and hearing echoes of children's laughter still hanging in the air, I knew Mom had been right. Love isn't about equal distribution, it's about recognizing what people give and honoring their sacrifice. It's about truth, even when truth is painful. It's about building relationships strong enough to survive conflict, honest enough to withstand scrutiny, deep enough to hold both hurt and healing. Mom had given me financial security, yes, but more importantly, she'd given me validation of choices that had seemed invisible to everyone but her. She'd proven that sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed, that devotion matters, that showing up day after day has value beyond what can be easily measured, and in doing so she'd given all 3 of her children something more precious than money: the opportunity to become better versions of ourselves, to build authentic relationships instead of performing shallow ones, to understand that inheritance isn't just about what we receive, but what we do with what we're given. 7 years after that devastating afternoon in her living room, watching her explain why she'd chosen me as her sole beneficiary, I finally understood the full depth of her final gift. It wasn't about the house or the money, It was about forcing us to grow, to face hard truths, to rebuild our family on a foundation of honesty instead of pretense. The inheritance had nearly destroyed us. But in choosing to fight for each other, to do the hard work of forgiveness and understanding, we'd become something stronger than we'd been before. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, authentic, built on truth instead of illusion, and that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.